The chandeliers of the Atlanta High Museum of Art dripped light like captured stars, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the city's elite. Tuxedos and silk gowns moved in a slow, graceful orbit around islands of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was the annual Ascend Gala, a fundraiser for youth empowerment. And Kesha Williams felt a quiet, hard-won sense of belonging. Her custom-made emerald dress flowed around her, a stark contrast to the faded blue polo shirt she once wore as a uniform. At 31, she was a senior project manager at Aperture Dynamics, one of the city's most innovative tech firms, a position she had clawed her way to through sheer intellect and a will forged in fire. She moved with an easy confidence, her smile genuine as she networked with venture capitalists and city council members. This world, with its hushed tones and strategic conversations, was a universe away from the incessant beeping of a cash register and the sterile, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. It was a universe she had built for herself, brick by painful brick. "Kesha, darling, you look absolutely radiant," a voice purred beside her. Kesha turned to see Eleanor Vance, the wife of a prominent attorney, her diamonds flashing. "Eleanor, it's wonderful to see you. That's a stunning piece." Eleanor touched the necklace. "A little something from my husband. He insists. Now. Have you been following the Viridian Global News? They're about to announce their new COO. The smart money is on Patricia Stevens, an absolute titan." The name landed like a stone in a tranquil pond, the ripples instantly disrupting the calm surface Kesha so carefully maintained. Patricia Stevens, the architect of the efficiency optimization program, the woman whose shadow had loomed over the darkest period of her life. Before Kesha could formulate a polite response, the gala's host tapped the microphone on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker. She is a visionary, a leader, and a testament to what can be achieved with grit and determination. Please join me in welcoming the Executive Vice President of Viridian Global, Ms. Patricia Stevens." A wave of polite applause swept through the hall. Patricia Stevens emerged from the wings, a vision of corporate power in a tailored white pantsuit. She was silver-haired, impeccably poised, her smile as sharp and polished as a surgical instrument. She moved to the podium with an air of absolute command, her eyes scanning the room. And then, they found Kesha. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something cold and triumphant passed across Stevens's face, before being replaced by a mask of professional warmth. Kesha's blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. Stevens knew she was here. Stevens began her speech, her voice a smooth, modulated instrument of persuasion. She spoke of overcoming adversity, of the importance of knowing one's own limitations, and then exceeding them. The crowd was captivated, hanging on every hollow, inspirational platitude. "True empowerment," Stevens declared, her voice resonating with false sincerity, "isn't about demanding a place you haven't earned. It's about understanding the structure of success. It's about accepting the role you are given and performing it with such excellence that you make yourself indispensable. Some people, of course, are better suited to certain roles than others. The world needs its leaders, but it also needs those who know their place, who understand that not every station is a glamorous one, but that every station has its purpose." Her gaze, sharp and unblinking, locked onto Kesha's again. A chill snaked down Kesha's spine. To the rest of the room, the words were generic corporate speak. To Kesha, they were a dagger, twisted with deliberate, personal cruelty. "Know your place." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "The place I put you in." The elegant ballroom dissolved. The scent of expensive perfume was replaced by the cloying smell of industrial cleaner. The gentle murmur of the crowd became the grating, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a checkout scanner. The warm, golden light of the chandeliers morphed into the harsh, buzzing fluorescence of Riverside Grocery. Store 113. The pain was a living thing, a hot wire running from her wrist to her shoulder. The cast, a clumsy cage of plaster, felt impossibly heavy. It bumped against the edge of the counter with every item she dragged across the scanner with her left hand. A gallon of milk, a 24-pack of water, a 10-pound bag of potatoes. Each one sent a jolt of agony through her fractured radius bone. 3 registers were open. She was working all 3, a frantic, one-armed juggling act, while the other 2 cashiers, both white, both marked with blue dots on the schedule board, chatted by their empty lanes. Her own name tag was red, Kesha Williams, a brand of expendability. Performance standards don't change because of personal circumstances. Williams, the store manager, Robert Taylor, had announced, his voice loud enough for the snaking line of irritated customers to hear. He was timing her with his phone, his lips a thin line of condescending disapproval. Humiliation burned hotter than the pain in her arm. Her face was slick with sweat, her uniform sticking to her back. A customer's phone was pointed at her, its red recording light a malevolent eye. She fumbled with a jar of pickles, her good hand trembling with exhaustion. It slipped, and, for a horrifying slow-motion second, it hung in the air before crashing to the linoleum, shattering in a splash of brine and glass. She stared at the mess, her composure finally cracking. The only thing she could feel was a profound, soul-crushing helplessness. A polite round of applause pulled Kesha back to the present. Stevens was smiling, basking in the adoration of the crowd, her victory complete. She had not only climbed to the top, but she had also taken the time to look down from her peak and remind Kesha of the pit she had crawled out of. The message was clear. I am untouchable. You are nothing. I remember you. And I can crush you whenever I please. Kesha's hands, which had been clenched into fists at her sides, slowly relaxed. The buzzing in her ears subsided. The storm of memory receded, leaving behind a cold, crystalline calm. She met Stephen's gaze across the crowded room. She did not look away. She did not flinch. She simply held the older woman's stare, her expression a perfect, unreadable mask. But behind her eyes, a decision was being made. A promise was being forged in the embers of a decade-old humiliation. Patricia Stevens thought this was an ending, a final assertion of her power. She was wrong. This was the beginning. The quiet hum of the city at night was the only sound in Kesha's apartment, perched on the 27th floor of a sleek glass tower in Midtown Atlanta. Her home was a sanctuary of order and minimalist elegance. Polished concrete floors, clean white walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering skyline. The lighting was warm, recessed, and intelligent, dimming and brightening with the rhythm of the day. It was a space designed for clarity and focus, the physical manifestation of the life she had meticulously constructed. Here, there were no fluorescent lights that buzzed with institutional fatigue, no sticky linoleum floors, no lingering scent of stale popcorn and disinfectant. The air was clean, filtered, smelling faintly of the single orchid that sat on her marble kitchen island. This was her world now, a world of clean lines and tangible success. She had fought for every square foot of it. After leaving Riverside Grocery, she had put herself through night school, earning a degree in computer science, then a master's in project management. She'd started at the bottom of the tech ladder, coding in a cubicle, distinguishing herself with a ferocious work ethic and a mind that saw patterns and solutions others missed. She outworked, outthought, and outmaneuvered everyone, not with aggression, but with a quiet, relentless competence that was impossible to deny. Now, at Aperture Dynamics, she led a team of brilliant engineers developing next-generation logistical software. They respected her, not just for her intelligence, but for her empathy and her unwavering calm under pressure. She had shown them what a true leader was. Kesha stood before the window, a glass of water in her hand, the city lights reflecting in her dark, thoughtful eyes. The gala, Stevens's speech, the triggered memory, it all felt like a violation. A toxic cloud from her past seeping into the pristine atmosphere of her present. For years, she had compartmentalized that time in her life. It was a scar, deep and ugly, but one she kept covered. She had convinced herself that the best revenge was her own success, that leaving it all behind was the only way to heal. But Stevens's deliberate, public barb had lanced the scar open. It wasn't enough for Stevens to have power. She needed Kesha to remember that she was powerless. It was a calculated act of cruelty, meant to reinforce a hierarchy that Stevens had established a decade ago. Kesha's gaze drifted to a framed photo on her bookshelf. It was her and her father, Marcus Williams, taken a year before he died. He was a big man with a booming laugh and hands calloused from a lifetime of work. He had been a union organizer, a fighter, a man who believed to his core in the dignity of labor. Never let anyone make you feel small. Kesha girl, he used to say, his voice rumbling with conviction. Your value isn't in the job you do, it's in the person you are. She had tried to live by that. But the system at Riverside Grocery, the color-coded system of oppression designed by Patricia Stevens, had been engineered specifically to make people feel small. It was designed to grind them down until they broke or quit. Kesha had quit, but she had refused to break. Now, she understood. Moving on wasn't enough. True justice wasn't about forgetting. It was about ensuring that what happened to her, to Damon, to Dorothy, and to countless others could never happen again. Stevens hadn't just humiliated her. She had issued a challenge. She had reminded Kesha that the past was not dead. Kesha walked over to her desk, the heart of her meticulously organized life. She powered on her laptop, the screen illuminating her face in the dark room. Her fingers, long and nimble, moved across the keyboard with practiced speed. She opened a new file, a secure, encrypted document. At the top, she typed a single phrase, Project Nightingale. She began to write, her mind working with the same logical precision she applied to her most complex projects. First, the objective: to expose the systematic discrimination architected by Patricia Stevens and hold her, and Viridian Global, accountable. Next, the key players: Patricia Stevens, Robert Taylor, the old store manager, and the other victims. She started a list of names, pulling them from the hazy corners of her memory. Damon Thompson, the quiet, hard-working stalker demoted to the overnight shift. Dorothy Miller, the kind woman from the deli who had her hours cut. Maria, a young mother from produce who was fired over a fabricated safety violation. Then, the evidence. It was 10 years old. Most of it would be gone. But data, as she knew better than anyone, has a ghost. Digital footprints, old server backups, archived HR files. Things get deleted, but they rarely disappear completely. Her strategy began to form. This couldn't be a frontal assault. She was one person against a multi-billion-dollar corporation and one of its most powerful executives. She needed leverage. She needed an inside source. She needed a narrative so compelling and evidence so irrefutable that it couldn't be ignored. As she worked, the suffocating opulence of the gala and the cold, sterile world of Viridian Global's corporate headquarters began to merge in her mind. She pictured the cold marble lobbies, The silent, judgmental elevators. The polished boardrooms where decisions were made that destroyed lives in places like Riverside Grocery. It was a world built on surfaces, reflecting a distorted reality where human resources were just numbers on a spreadsheet, and labor cost optimization was a euphemism for cruelty. Stevens lived in that world. She thrived in it. But Kesha lived in a world of data, logic, and systems, and she knew that every system, no matter how powerful, had a vulnerability. She just had to find it. The quiet calm that had settled over her at the gala was now something else entirely. It was focus. It was purpose. The woman who left that grocery store 10 years ago was a survivor. The woman sitting in her apartment tonight, bathed in the glow of her laptop, was a strategist, and the fight was just beginning. The following Monday, Kesha sat in a leather armchair that felt like it was designed to swallow you whole. The law offices of Vance, Holloway and Reed occupied the top 2 floors of a skyscraper downtown, a testament to their exorbitant hourly rates. The air smelled of old books, lemon polish, and quiet, expensive victory. Arthur Vance, a senior partner whose pinstripe suit was sharper than his gaze, leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He had listened patiently as Kesha recounted the story of the color-coded schedule, of Patricia Stevens, and of the humiliation at the gala. "It's a compelling story, Ms. Williams. Genuinely," he said, his tone a carefully calibrated blend of sympathy and pragmatism. "But a story is not a case. What you're describing happened 10 years ago. The statute of limitations on workplace discrimination claims is, to be blunt, long past." "I'm not necessarily looking to file a lawsuit for myself," Kesha clarified, her voice even. "I want to expose the system. I want to hold Stevens accountable." Vance sighed, a sound of weary experience. Accountable for what? Exactly. For being a ruthless executive. For using coded language at a fundraiser. None of that is illegal. To build a case, you would need documented evidence of discriminatory intent from that time. Memos, emails, internal reports, the kind of thing that a corporation like Viridian Global would have scrubbed from their servers years ago. Do you have any such evidence? No, Kesha admitted. Not yet. Therein lies the problem, Vance said, leaning forward. Without a smoking gun. All you have is your word against a soon-to-be COO of a Fortune 500 company. Furthermore, he added, gesturing to the file her assistant had prepared on her, you've done exceptionally well for yourself. Your current success would be used against you. Their lawyers would paint you as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta, seeking to tarnish a successful woman's reputation out of jealousy. They would argue that the system, whatever it was, clearly didn't cause you irreparable harm. They would turn your strength into a weakness. This was the first obstacle, the wall of legal and practical reality. Any other person might have been discouraged. But Kesha simply processed the information, recalibrating her approach. So the official channels are a dead end, she stated. Not as a question, but as a conclusion. I'm afraid so, Vance said, a hint of finality in his tone. He saw this as the end of the conversation. For Kesha, it was the start of a new plan. She had hoped for an ally in the legal system, but it was clear she would have to operate outside of it. Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance, she said, rising from the chair with a poise that seemed to surprise him. You've given me a great deal of clarity. Back in her car, parked in the cavernous underground garage, Kesha took a deep breath. Vance's words, meant to dissuade her, had only sharpened her resolve. He was right. A conventional attack was doomed to fail. She needed an unconventional one. Her first call was to a man she hadn't spoken to in years. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name Damon Thompson. After Riverside, he had bounced around low-wage jobs before finally landing a position in the IT department of a small company that, through a series of acquisitions, was now a subsidiary of Viridian Global. He was on the inside, buried deep in the corporate structure, but inside nonetheless. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Hello." "Damon, it's Kesha Williams. We used to work together at Riverside Grocery." There was a long pause. "Kesha, wow, it's been a long time. I heard you were doing big things in tech." "I'm doing okay," she said. "Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you about what happened back then. About the schedules, the dots, about Patricia Stevens." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. She could almost hear him weighing the risk of the conversation. "That's a past I try not to think about," he said finally, his voice low. "I know. Me too," Kesha said, her voice softening. "But Stevens is about to be named COO of Viridian. She's never faced any consequences for what she did to us. To all of us. I can't let that stand. Damon. But I can't do it alone." She heard him take a deep breath. "What do you want from me?" "Information," she said. "You work in IT. You know the systems. I need to know if there are any old archives, deep storage servers, anything from 10 years ago that might have survived the data purges." "Kesha, that's my job you're asking me to risk," he said, the fear evident in his voice. "I have a family. I would never ask you to do anything that would put you in direct jeopardy," she assured him. "I'm not asking you to steal data, just to point me in the right direction. Tell me where the digital ghosts might be hiding. I'll handle the rest." Another long pause. She could picture him, a good and decent man who had been systematically undervalued and pushed aside, now being asked to risk the small measure of stability he had found. "There's a decommissioned data center in Alpharetta," he said at last, the words coming in a rush, as if to get them out before he could change his mind. "They use it for long-term archival storage. Tapes, old hard drives. It's a digital graveyard. If anything survived, it would be there. But the security is insane. Kesha, physical and digital. There's no way in." "Let me worry about that," she said, a surge of gratitude warming her chest. "Thank you, Damon. Truly." "Be careful," he whispered and hung up. Kesha leaned her head back against the seat. The first obstacle, the legal impossibility, had been identified. The first step to overcoming it, finding an inside source, had been taken. Now came the rising action. The slow and dangerous work of digging for a truth that powerful people wanted to remain buried forever. She started the car, her path forward now illuminated. She wasn't a disgruntled employee anymore. She was an investigator, and her first target was a digital graveyard in Alpharetta. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in clandestine operations, orchestrated by Kesha with the precision of a software rollout. Her days were spent at Aperture Dynamics, flawlessly managing her team, her focus and dedication never wavering. Her nights, however, belonged to Project Nightingale. Her apartment transformed into a command center. One monitor displayed architectural blueprints of the Alpharetta data center, which she'd acquired from a public county database. Another ran sophisticated software, probing the data center's external network for vulnerabilities, not to hack it, but to understand its defenses. A large whiteboard was covered in flowcharts and timelines, mapping out the corporate history of Viridian Global and its subsidiaries. Damon became her reluctant, cautious guide through the labyrinth of Viridian's digital infrastructure. They communicated only through encrypted messaging apps, never speaking on the phone again. He would send her snippets of information, old IT protocols, lists of legacy software, the names of long-retired network administrators. Each piece was a small breadcrumb, and Kesha followed the trail with relentless patience. She knew a direct digital assault on the archive was impossible and foolish. Instead, she focused on social engineering. She learned that the data center conducted quarterly audits, bringing in third-party contractors to verify inventory. She created a shell company, Legacy Data Solutions, complete with a professional website and fabricated credentials. Her goal was to get herself inside the building not as a thief, but as a contractor. While building this elaborate cover, she also delved into Patricia Stevens's history, looking for anything that might explain the depth of her cruelty. She subscribed to services that archived old newspapers from across the country, spending hours scrolling through microfiche scans of small-town papers. It was tedious, frustrating work. Stevens's official corporate biography was sanitized, mentioning a business degree from a state university and a steady, unremarkable climb up the corporate ladder. One evening, while cross-referencing Viridian's property acquisition records with Stevens's early career history, Kesha noticed an oddity. One of Viridian's first major acquisitions, a textile company called Carolina Weavers, was based in Belmont, North Carolina. According to Stevens's resume, her very first job out of college was as a junior accountant at that same company. It was a minor detail, but it was a concrete link between Stevens's origins and the corporation she now helped lead. Kesha focused her search on Belmont, North Carolina, in the years leading up to the acquisition, and that's when she found it. A series of articles from the Belmont Gazette dated 1995. The headlines were stark: Stevenson mill workers vote to strike. Negotiation stall as union holds firm. Local mill faces bankruptcy. The Stevenson Mill. Not Stevens. A slight but significant difference. The articles detailed a bitter, months-long labor dispute. The workers, demanding better wages and safer conditions, were represented by a charismatic and determined union organizer. Kesha's blood ran cold when she saw his name in a grainy photograph, standing on a picket line with his arm around a striking worker. Marcus Williams, her father. She read on, her heart pounding in her chest. The strike had been successful for the union in the short term, but it had crippled the family-owned mill. The final article was a somber piece about the Stevenson family, who had lost their business, their home, and their standing in the community. The patriarch, Charles Stevenson, had suffered a debilitating stroke shortly after the bankruptcy, which the paper strongly implied was due to the stress. Kesha leaned back, her mind reeling. Patricia Stevens was Patricia Stevenson, the daughter of the man whose life and business her father's union strike had, however inadvertently, destroyed. This changed everything. This wasn't about impersonal corporate policy or casual racism. This was a vendetta. It was a deeply personal, multi-generational campaign of revenge. Patricia Stevens had seen the name Kesha Williams on an employee roster at a suburban Atlanta grocery store and saw not a cashier, but the daughter of the man she blamed for her family's ruin. The red dots, the impossible schedules, the public humiliations, it was all a slow, cruel, and meticulously planned retribution. Stevens wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder for power. She was climbing it to gain a high enough vantage point from which to destroy the legacy of Marcus Williams, starting with his daughter. The revelation was horrifying, but it was also a key. It was the why. It explained the chilling, personal nature of the malice at the gala. Stevens wasn't just a corporate monster. She was a woman fueled by a decades-old wound. The new knowledge solidified Kesha's resolve, but it also tinged it with a complex sorrow. Her father had been a hero to her, a champion of the working class, But in this story, to this one family, he was the villain. It was a heavy, complicated truth. Her focus shifted. Now she knew what she was looking for in the Alpharetta archives. Not just proof of the efficiency optimization program, but anything that could connect it to Stevens's personal history. A hidden file, a personal log, a stray email that referenced her past. The smoking gun had to be there. Her plan to infiltrate the data center was now more critical than ever. Her shell company, Legacy Data Solutions, received a reply to its bid for the next auditing contract. They were being considered. The door was creaking open. She had the motivation. She had the target. And soon, she might have the access. But she was no longer just fighting a corporate system. She was stepping into the crosshairs of a woman who had been nursing a grievance for half her life. A woman who had already proven she would stop at nothing to get her revenge. The email confirming Legacy Data Solutions' auditing contract was both a triumph and a terrifying step into the unknown. For 2 days, Kesha would have legitimate access to the Alpharetta data center. 2 days to find a digital needle in a 10-year-old haystack. But Patricia Stevens was not a woman who left things to chance. As Kesha finalized her preparations, the first tremor of retaliation struck. It started with a summons to her director's office at Aperture Dynamics, Mark Renshaw, a man who had always been her staunch supporter. Looked unusually grim. "Kesha, sit down," he said, avoiding her eyes. "We've received a complaint, an anonymous one, from someone on your team." Kesha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A complaint about what? "It alleges that you've been creating a hostile work environment," Mark said, the words sounding foreign and absurd. "Favoritism, verbal harassment. It also claims you've been using company resources for personal projects on work time." "Mark, that's insane," Kesha said, her voice steady despite the shock. "You know my record. You know how I manage my team." "I do," he said, finally looking at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of apology and helplessness. But the complaint was escalated, not to HR, but to the board. It turns out Viridian Global is one of our parent company's biggest clients. Their EVP, Patricia Stevens, made a personal call to our CEO. She expressed concern. The trap had been sprung. Stevens hadn't discovered Kesha's plan. Not specifically, but some internal security flag must have been raised by Damon's low-level inquiries or by Kesha's own digital reconnaissance. Stevens didn't know what Kesha was up to, but she knew she was up to something. This was a warning shot, a demonstration of her reach and power. "I am being placed on paid administrative leave, pending a full investigation," Mark concluded, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Kesha walked out of the building in a daze, her work laptop confiscated, her access badges deactivated, in a single phone call. Stevens had poisoned her professional life, turning her sanctuary of success into a place of suspicion. Her team, the people she had mentored and championed, would now be questioned about her conduct. The career she had built with such care was now hanging by a thread. The isolation was immediate and suffocating. Emails to her work friends went unanswered. A call to her mentor on the executive team went straight to voicemail. Stevens had not only attacked her job, she had severed her from her professional support network. The second blow landed 2 days later. An official-looking letter arrived from her bank, informing her that her accounts had been frozen due to a suspicious activity investigation flagged by their corporate security division. A quick search revealed the bank's parent company also had deep financial ties to Viridian Global. It was a sophisticated, brutal strangulation of her resources. She felt a wave of the same helplessness she'd experienced a decade ago, standing in a puddle of pickle brine and shattered glass. Stevens was systematically dismantling her life with the same cold precision she had used to design the color-coded schedule. She was isolating her, cutting off her resources, and making her feel utterly alone. This was the second obstacle, and it was an order of magnitude more terrifying than the first. This wasn't just about blocking her. It was about destroying her. For a full day, Kesha allowed the despair to wash over her. She sat in her silent apartment, the city lights outside seeming to mock her confinement. Stevens was going to win. The woman was too powerful, her reach too long. The fight was unwinnable. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Never let anyone make you feel small. But she did feel small. She felt microscopic. Then, a message blinked on her encrypted chat program. It was Damon. "They're watching me." Its security came to my desk, asked about my recent search queries in the archives. I played dumb, said I was looking for old system specs for a compatibility issue. I don't think they bought it. Kesha, this is too dangerous. I'm out. His fear was palpable, and Kesha felt a pang of guilt for pulling him into this. She typed a reply. "I understand. Thank you for everything. Be safe." She was truly alone now. Her career was in flames. Her finances were locked, and her only ally was gone. Stevens had her pinned. But as the initial shock and despair began to fade, they were replaced by something else, a cold, hard anger. Stevens had made a critical miscalculation. She had assumed that Kesha, when backed into a corner, would crumble. She had mistaken Kesha's quiet composure for weakness. But the fires of Riverside Grocery hadn't just scarred Kesha. They had forged her. Stevens's attack, meant to break her, had instead severed her last attachments to the status quo. Her job, her reputation, her comfortable life. They were already gone, or in jeopardy. She had nothing left to lose. And she still had her ace in the hole, the auditing contract. Her visit to the Alpharetta data center was in 2 days. It was no longer just a mission to find evidence. It was her only way out. She had to succeed. Failure was not an option. Kesha stood up and walked to her whiteboard. She erased the complex plans and contingency scenarios. This was no longer a chess match. This was a blitz. She had 48 hours to find the proof she needed before Stevens's corporate machine crushed her completely. The isolation, the fear, she channeled it all into a singular, diamond-hard focus. Stevens thought she had cornered her prey. She was about to find out she had only cornered a predator. The Viridian Global Annual Shareholder Meeting was being held at the Georgia World Congress Center, a sprawling monument to commerce and capital. The main hall was a sea of dark suits and expectant faces, the air thick with the scent of money and ambition. On a massive stage, flanked by screens displaying upward trending graphs, the company's CEO was warming up the crowd. The grand finale of the event was to be the official announcement of Patricia Stevens's promotion to Chief Operating Officer. It was to be her coronation. Kesha watched from a service corridor, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum against her ribs. She wore the navy blue blazer and ID badge of a junior event technician, a disguise made possible by a desperate, last-minute call to a cousin who worked for the convention center's catering company. Her infiltration of the Alpharetta data center had been a frantic, nerve-wracking success. In the final hours of her audit, buried on a mislabeled backup tape from a former executive's personal server, she had founded a folder labeled PS Memos, Private. Inside was everything. Drafts of the Efficiency Optimization Program, with handwritten notes in the margins explicitly linking red-tier employees to demographics with higher turnover potential. But the true smoking gun was a personal journal, a series of password-protected documents. In one entry, dated shortly after she took the district manager position. Stevens had written, "Saw the name today. Marcus Williams's daughter. Working as a cashier. The universe provides such perfect opportunities for balance. He took my father's legacy. I will take his." This was the proof of intent, the link between the corporate program and the personal vendetta. But as Kesha prepared for her final move, she had discovered one more thing. Tucked away in a separate file on that same tape was a scanned document, a certified letter from the local chapter of the AFL-CIO, signed by her father, Marcus Williams. It was addressed to Charles Stevenson. It was an offer, written after the strike had ended, to provide the Stevenson family with a personal loan from the union's relief fund to help them transition their business or start anew. "Our fight was with the mill's policies, not with your family," her father had written. The offer had been rejected. The letter was a secondary twist that changed the moral calculus of her entire mission. Her father had tried to help. Stevens's entire lifelong crusade was built on a foundation of pride and a refusal to see her family's adversary as anything but a monster. This wasn't just about revenge for Kesha anymore. It was about revealing the whole, complicated truth. Now, she stood in the wings, her evidence loaded onto a small, encrypted USB drive. Damon, in a final act of courage, after hearing about the attack on her, had given her a backdoor exploit into the presentation software. From any networked terminal in the building, she could hijack the main screens. On stage, the CEO was winding up his introduction. "And so, it is with immense pride that I introduce the woman who will lead our operations into the future. Our new COO, Ms. Patricia Stevens." The hall erupted in applause. Stevens walked onto the stage, a portrait of triumph, her white suit glowing under the spotlights. She approached the podium, smiling out at the adoring crowd, the board members, the investors. Kesha moved. She slipped into a small AV control booth at the back of the hall. The technician was focused on the live feed. Kesha quietly approached the secondary presentation terminal, her movements swift and silent. She inserted the drive. The exploit worked. A command window, invisible to the audience, opened on her screen. She was in. Stevens began her acceptance speech. "Thank you. It is the honor of a lifetime to stand before you today." Kesha waited for the Q&A session, as planned. But as she watched Stevens on the screen, so poised, so utterly confident in her victory, a new plan formed. A direct confrontation was better, more dramatic, more undeniable. She slipped out of the booth and walked calmly, but quickly to the side of the hall, where a microphone was set up for audience questions. She got in line behind a financial analyst from a major bank. "And I promise to bring the same rigor and efficiency to the entire company that we used to achieve a 12% margin improvement in the Southeast Retail Division," Stevens was saying. The analyst asked a softball question about supply chain logistics. Stevens answered it with practiced ease. Then, the floor manager's eyes fell on Kesha. "Yes, ma'am, your question." Kesha stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the immense hall. "Miss Stevens, my name is Kesha Williams. 10 years ago, I worked at your Riverside grocery location in Atlanta. I have a question about the efficiency optimization program you just referenced." On stage, a flicker of disbelief crossed Stevens's face, quickly replaced by a cold mask of control. The name, spoken so publicly, was a shock. Security guards started moving toward Kesha. "I'm sorry. This forum is for shareholder questions only," Stevens said, her voice tight. "Security, please." "My question is for the shareholders," Kesha countered, her voice rising in volume, refusing to be silenced. I want to ask them if a 12% margin improvement is worth a system of color-coded scheduling designed to systematically exploit minority workers. As she said the words, she typed a command on the small remote keyboard in her hand, on the giant screens behind Stevens. The image of the upward trending graph was instantly replaced by a high-resolution photo of the Riverside grocery schedule board, the red and blue dots stark and damning. The hall fell into a stunned silence, broken by a wave of gasps and murmurs. "This is absurd," Stevens snapped, her composure cracking. "This woman is a disgruntled former employee with a personal grudge." It was personal. "Patricia," Kesha said, her eyes locking with Stevens's across the hall. "Or should I say, Ms. Stevenson." She hit the next command. The schedule board was replaced by the scanned headline from the Belmont Gazette, "Stevenson Mill Faces Bankruptcy." Stevens froze. The color drained from her face. The carefully constructed wall around her past had just been demolished in front of the entire world. "You didn't create that program to improve margins." Kesha's voice rang out, filled with the power of undeniable truth. "You did it for revenge. Revenge against the daughter of Marcus Williams, the union organizer you blame for ruining your family." The screens now showed the page from Stevens's private journal. The damning words magnified for all to see. "He took my father's legacy. I will take his." The room erupted. The media, seated in the front rows, scrambled, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The stock ticker, displayed on a side screen, began to dip, then dive, the numbers turning from green to a blood red. Stevens stood at the podium, speechless, exposed. Her corporate allies on the stage looked at her with horror. Her entire narrative, her carefully crafted image, had been incinerated in less than 60 seconds. But Kesha wasn't finished. She had one last piece of the truth to reveal. "But the story you've been telling yourself for 30 years is a lie," Kesha said, her voice now softer, laced with a strange, sad pity. "You built your life on a foundation of hatred for my father, but you never knew the whole story." She pressed the final command. The scanned image of her father's letter to Charles Stevenson appeared on the screen, his compassionate words filling the space, the offer of help, the clear distinction between a labor fight and a personal one. "My father wasn't a monster," Kesha said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a man who fought for people, and when the fight was over, he tried to help his adversary. Your father's pride and your hatred wouldn't let you see that." That was the final blow. It didn't just expose Stevens's actions as malicious. It exposed her entire life's motivation as a tragic, self-inflicted delusion. She wasn't a righteous avenger. She was the curator of a petty, pointless grudge. Security had reached Kesha now, but it didn't matter. The work was done. As they gently but firmly escorted her out of the hall, she looked back at the stage. Patricia Stevens stood alone, bathed in the harsh glare of the spotlights, a ruined woman amidst the wreckage of her life. Her image on the giant screens replaced by the plummeting stock price of the company she was supposed to lead. The battle was over. The truth had won. The aftermath was a corporate firestorm. The shareholder meeting had ended in chaos. Patricia Stevens was escorted from the building. Her career not just over, but annihilated. The story exploded across the media landscape, leading every business news channel and trending globally on social media. Viridian Global and Kesha Williams became household names overnight. Viridian Global's stock plummeted by 30% before the markets closed, erasing billions in shareholder value. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting and, by day's end, had fired Stevens, issued a public apology, and announced a full, independent investigation into the efficiency optimization program, and any other discriminatory practices across the company. Kesha found herself at the center of a media frenzy. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. She was inundated with interview requests, book deals, and offers of legal representation from the country's most prestigious civil rights firms. The charges against her at Aperture Dynamics were dropped instantly, followed by a profuse, fawning apology from her CEO. Her bank accounts were unfrozen with a similar level of groveling contrition. The corporate machine that Stevens had turned against her was now desperately trying to get on her good side. She ignored it all for a few days, disconnecting from the noise. The victory felt less like a triumphant celebration and more like the profound, quiet exhaustion that follows a long battle. She had exposed the truth, but it had come at a cost. She had been forced to relive her own trauma and to publicly unpack the complicated legacy of her father and the pain he had inadvertently caused another family. In the falling action of the drama, the consequences cascaded. The independent investigation at Veridian uncovered the full extent of Stevens's program, which had been secretly implemented in nearly 24 stores, affecting hundreds of employees. A massive class action lawsuit was filed on their behalf. Robert Taylor, the former store manager, and several other district managers involved were also terminated and named in the suit. Kesha, represented by a top pro bono law firm, entered into private negotiations with Veridian Global. They offered her a staggering sum of money to settle any personal claims. But she wasn't interested in a simple payday. She was interested in systemic change. She dealt with the emotional fallout quietly. She spoke with Damon, who was being hailed as a whistleblower hero within the company and had already been offered a major promotion. She reconnected with old colleagues from Riverside, many of whom had reached out after seeing the news, sharing their own stories and thanking her for giving them a voice. The shared experience created a bond of healing, a quiet acknowledgement that their pain had finally been seen and validated. The isolation Stevens had imposed on her was replaced by a community of survivors. Her job at Aperture Dynamics was waiting for her, but when she thought about returning, it felt like trying to fit back into a life she had outgrown. The work, once her sanctuary, now seemed small compared to the fight she had just waged. Her purpose had shifted. Project Nightingale was complete, but a new, larger project was just beginning to take shape in her mind. The settlement with Veridian Global was finalized not in dollars, but in deeds. Kesha refused any personal payment beyond a symbolic $1. Instead, she leveraged her immense influence to force the company to establish a $25 million fund. It wasn't for damages, but for restitution. The fund would be used to create educational grants, career development programs, and legal aid for victims of workplace discrimination across the country. 6 months after the shareholder meeting, Kesha stood behind a podium on a sunny Atlanta afternoon. The air buzzed with the energy of news cameras and supportive community members. Behind her was a building that was both a ghost of the past and a promise for the future, the old Riverside Grocery. Store number 113. It was boarded up and derelict, a concrete shell that had once housed so much quiet misery. Kesha had used her newfound influence to purchase the property. She looked out at the crowd, her face calm and confident. "This building," she began, her voice clear and strong, "was once a place where people were made to feel small. It was a place where human dignity was traded for profit margins, where potential was suffocated by prejudice. For many of us, it was a place of pain." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Today, we reclaim it. Today, we begin the work of transforming this place of broken spirits into a place for building futures." She announced her new venture, funded by the Viridian settlement and supported by a coalition of community partners. The old grocery store would be torn down, and in its place would rise the Marcus Williams Center for Workplace Equity. It would not be a monument to a grievance, but a living institution, a vocational training center offering free courses in tech, skilled trades, and entrepreneurship for marginalized youth. It would be a place that provided the tools for empowerment, a place that would create opportunities instead of systematically destroying them. Her father's legacy, once used as a weapon against her, was now a shield and a source of strength for others. Her journey of personal revenge had transformed into a mission of public restoration. After the speeches and the applause, after the reporters had packed up their cameras and the well-wishers had drifted away, Kesha remained. She stood alone on the cracked pavement of the parking lot, looking at the building where her long journey had begun. There was no bitterness left, no lingering anger. There was only a sense of profound, quiet peace. Her phone buzzed. It was the lawyer handling her father's estate. "Kesha, we found one last box in the back of his old storage unit. I don't know how we missed it all these years. It's mostly old union papers, but I thought you should have it." Later that evening, in her apartment, she opened the dusty cardboard box. Inside, beneath stacks of faded union newsletters and organizing pamphlets, was a small, manila folder. She opened it. The first thing she saw was the original certified letter her father had sent to Charles Stevenson. Returned, unopened, the postmark still clear. And beneath it was another letter. The envelope was brittle with age. It was addressed to her father at the Union Hall. The handwriting was sharp, angry, and distinctly adolescent. She unfolded the single page. "Mr. Williams," it read, "you think you've won, but you haven't. You destroyed my family. You took everything from us. I will never forget what you did. I will spend my whole life getting strong. And one day, I promise you, your family will know what it feels like to lose everything. You will pay for this." It was signed, Patricia Stevenson. Kesha stared at the letter, a final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. It was the genesis of it all, a vow of revenge made by a wounded, heartbroken teenager, a vow that had festered into a cold, corporate poison over 30 years. Seeing it, holding the raw, unprocessed pain of the young Patricia, Kesha felt the last vestiges of her own anger dissolve, replaced by a deep and somber understanding. She had not only defeated an enemy, she had answered a cry of pain that had echoed across decades. Her father's integrity was affirmed, his compassion proven, and she, his daughter, was finally, completely, free from the shadow of the past. She had not only won, she had healed.